Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Pettis. I'm an entomologist, and I've worked with honeybees for over 40 years, and I've worked with USDA as an agricultural research scientist for over 20 years.
Hi everyone, I'm Carlos Perea, CEO and co-founder of Terra, Vera, the makers of Vera, and I'm honored and thrilled to be here with Dr. Jeff Pettis to talk about the world of honeybees and what's going on. Awesome. Well, we're incredibly honored to be partnering with you and look forward to getting some of your insights into what's going on. But to remind you and everybody else, at Terra Vera, we really started the company with the idea that we could make agriculture more sustainable. And of course, pollinators are such a key part of that equation, not only for pollinators' sake, but also for the sake of our food security. So in this series, I'm hoping that we can get some insights into what's going on with honeybees and see what we really can be doing to reverse these pretty alarming trends. So with that, Dr. Pettis, I'd kind of just like you to give an overview. I mean, you were part of when colony collapse disorder was first coined, and we've seen some alarming trends over the last 20 years. But despite all of the media hype about we're losing our bees, we've kind of been able to keep pace, breeding as many bees as we've lost. But could you talk about what happened over the last 20 years and what's going on now? And is this part of the same set of equations?
Sure.
Is this colony collapse disorder?
No, I from all the reports I've seen, and I haven't been out to California to look at it personally, but I was heavily involved in CCD. We had a working group while I was at USDA, and we lost between 40 and 60% of the colonies over a 2-year period, different levels and different times. But we coined that term. Since then, those symptoms have died down, but we continued to monitor yearly losses of honeybee colonies. And they'd go between 28 to 35%. It's kind of been steady up and down, but over the last couple of years, it's crept up. And last year, I think officially it was 42%, or 48% maybe. It was the highest we've ever recorded. So the last 2 years have been really challenging. Now comes to this spring, and I expect when the numbers are in, it'll be way over 50% loss of honeybee colonies nationwide in the U.S. You couple that with certain commercial beekeepers who are losing 70 to 90%, and they're going to have trouble restocking. They're going to have trouble staying in business. So there's a urgent need. And no, we don't understand all the reasons, but we know the situation is actually getting worse.
Okay, let's talk about it from the perspective of that beekeeper that's lost 50% or more. And I've heard in some cases 70, 80, 90% losses. So pretty alarming. I mean, what does that mean to the beekeeper themselves, just from not just a business perspective, but the ability to stay in business and continue to keep hives alive?
Yeah. So at 50% loss, if you were a cattle rancher, you'd be out of business. But as a beekeeper, 50% loss, you can make it up. You have 50% of your hives are still doing okay, maybe. You can make colony divisions or splits, we call them, and start to build back. It still takes time and energy and money. So it's not good. 50% loss is not good. Once you get over that, it's almost virtually impossible to rebuild. And there's also a huge emotional toll on beekeepers. They get to the 75 and 80%, and it's like, I just need to change something because I've been doing the same thing, and now my results are getting worse. And it takes a toll economically. And once you get over 50% loss, it becomes very hard to rebound.
Yes, so let me see if I have this correct, because I think what's happened over the last 20 years is we've seen, like historically, we saw rates 10%, 15%, and then when we started seeing colony collapse disorder, whatever the cause is, we started seeing 30, 40%. But at those rates, as challenging as it was, beekeepers could keep up, and in a way, it created a business opportunity, if I'm not mistaken, where some people could breed bees, sell them, and in a way, the losses, although they were economically challenging, beekeepers could keep up with the demand, so to speak. And now at over 50%, that looks like it may not be possible. Is that accurate?
That's pretty accurate, because we've always had queen and we call package bee producers who produce new bees to help people recover from losses. But they're stretched to the max right now. In other words, they can probably sell every bee that they can produce, a queen or package bee or nucleus colony that they can produce. So yes, I think we're kind of at the limit, and what's threatened is our food security and pollination. So if the bees can't rebound, and we rely on commercial beekeepers for that, and they've rebounded from these 30 to 40% losses by people buying bees and or just working hard. They've worked really hard to rebound, and hard work is probably no longer going to be effective when you get above 50% loss.
Yeah, so the overall trend is not good just for beekeepers, but stay on that topic for a minute of, what are the implications to our crops and food security? Because we've been hearing a lot about bee loss, for decades. I think some people maybe have become a little bit numb to that. At the same time, the trends now should get everybody to take notice. But let's kind of remind everybody, whether you're a beekeeper or not, what are the implications to our food security?
Yeah. So about 2/3 of our diet are wind pollinated, which is rice, corn, and wheat. So we're not going to starve. But that other 1/3 of our diet, which is fruits, nuts, and vegetables, and that's all the nutritious parts of our diet, that relies on some form of pollination, some animal pollination. And honeybees carry the bulk of that because they're mobile. We can move them to the crop when it's blooming. And so apples become more expensive, almonds become more expensive, cherries, tomatoes, everything. So there's a lot that's at stake. And again, these commercial beekeepers that I've talked to coming out of California, most of them are devastated. They are down. They maybe have 20 to 30% of their operation alive. So it's going to be trouble for them to meet the pollination demand that starts after almonds. Almonds is January, February. Then they move and start going to the orchard crops that we think about, and then into blueberries and cranberries and summer honey production.
So is it feasible that even as early as this fall of 2025, we're going to start to see produce prices increase because there's just not enough honeybees to stimulate production? Is that likely in the cards? Kind of like what we're seeing with eggs.
It's always you don't want to sound like Chicken Little and crying, but I've never seen it this bad. I've never seen the losses with the commercial beekeepers that I've seen. Most of them can recover fairly quickly coming out of almonds. And this year, I'm hearing really bad stories from a lot of the large commercial beekeepers. So yes, I could see not almond, apple growers or blueberry growers that can't get enough bees, and thus their production will be down. It may initially just hurt the grower, and you may not see it at the market, but soon enough you'll see it at the market, a price increase.
Got it. So kind of staying on that topic, I mean, some of the folks that I've come across are maybe thinking that in a way what's bad for the commercial beekeeper or the managed colonies might be good for the natural bees, and there's a trade-off there. I mean, could you talk a little bit about why that may be a false narrative, or what are the implications, I guess, for natural pollinators?
Sure. So we're talking managed pollinators, mostly honeybees, and we can help them. We can feed them. We can do different things to keep them alive. The other species of bees is, hundreds, thousands in the U.S., and they're not doing well either. A lot of that is habitat destruction and pesticide use. So you think, well, we don't need the managed bees. We can rely on the wild bees. And that's becoming less and less true because their numbers are declining also. And that it's affecting honeybees because habitat loss and pesticide use are two strong drivers of pollinator decline in general.
So we kind of get hit on two sides. The honeybees are kind of a canary in the coal mine, if you will, what's happened with natural pollinators. So that's alarming. And then on the other side of the equation, our agricultural systems are kind of set up around managed honeybees, aren't they? They kind of depend on that for getting their yields up.
Right. So we have large fields, large orchards. And so a managed pollinator like honeybees can be moved directly into the crop. If you take wild bees and you've got larger and larger field sizes, they often don't fly as far. And so, and they have to be present in the hedgerows or field rows nearby. So it's not like you can move those wild bees. So that's one of the major advantages of honeybees is the mobility to move to the crop when it's in bloom. And with wild pollinators, as our agricultural fields and orchards have gotten bigger and bigger, the wild bees don't do as good a job because they can't reach inside these large fields. That's part of it. Yeah.
Interesting. So maybe one or two more thoughts on this segment, on this kind of global issue. So we've talked a lot about the trends, and you've talked a lot about why this is key to food security, not just beekeepers. But what do we think's going on? I mean, why the 10%, and then we got 30% and a bunch of pretty bad, but numbers that we could manage. And now we're seeing the last 2 or 3 years, I guess, in a row, kind of record numbers. And what's really alarming is the trend is going up. We're not sure if 50 or 60 or 70% is the end of this. So what do you think's going on? The $700 million question I've read, at least that's
Yeah,
one of the estimates was it's a $700 million impact. And I don't know if that's understating or overstating.
it 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 starts with land use, which also affects nutrition of wild bees and managed bees. Um, we we've turned places into cities, and then and our farming situation, most farming, we're using a lot of herbicides, which create nice sterile fields of soybeans, for instance, but they only bloom once a year. So even the wild bees that are in that area, they don't have much that they can forage on throughout the summer. So heavy herbicide and then other pesticide use has really kind of changed the environment, as has urbanization. So that's a big driver. And then with honeybees in particular, we have this one parasite, varroa mite, that by itself is damaging, and we have viruses that interact with varroa that are causing major losses. And so we went from 10%, as you said, we went from 10% historic loss over a year. We jumped to at least 20% with just varroa. Now we have these other stressors, nutritional stress, pesticide stress, and I think all that combined, we're getting in the 40 to 50% range, and it's pretty much unsustainable. We need alternatives.
Awesome. Well, look forward to talking to you more about some of the specifics in upcoming episodes. But one last question, unless you have other thoughts that you want to share. So how much of this do we think is, a California problem or a United States problem, or is it really a global problem? What do we know at this stage about these losses?
Okay. I'll speak actually to wild pollinators. So wild pollinators across the globe are declining, and that's mostly human driven. I mean, humans, heavy agriculture, urbanization, climate change is also just general changes in flowering patterns are affecting all wild bees around the globe. With honeybees, the U.S. Seems to be not unique, but we're challenged more than some other areas. Although I know in Europe and Asia, they're also having trouble, keeping honeybees alive. It's also challenging.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to getting more of your thoughts on what can be done and what's really going on. But with that, I think we have a pretty good overview of what's happening in the world of honeybees and why all of us should care. So, any last thoughts on kind of the global issues?
No, just that we should care about the bees themselves, all the wild bees, but we should also be a little selfish and think about this is our food supply that's at stake. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, stay tuned for future episodes that might get into a little bit more detail on what's going on. But with that, we will call this overview a wrap.